welcome back to the Travel Ones podcast. Today, my guest is Jamie Mittelman. She's the CEO and founder of the Flame Bears, a podcast show and a company derived about highlighting and showcasing female athletes that have been in the Olympics. Is that pretty close?
Hey, Peter, I'm excited to be here. Yeah, you pretty much got it. And Paralympian. So,
Yeah, right.
both Olympians and Paralympians. You got it.
I've had one Paralympian on so far, Lex Gillette, and then I had to go back and look. I've had five female Olympians on the show so far. So I was when I saw
I
you,
love it.
like,
So, so cool.
let's talk about the same stuff. It's cool that you're promoting it, doing events and doing everything else. So, what's kind of the background of Flame Bears?
Exactly. So, we're the world's first media production company that exclusively tells the stories of the best female athletes in the world. And we tell the stories, as you said, via podcast, but also video and live events. And we do this because historically 85% of sports coverage goes to men. And hey, I'm a massive sports fan. I grew up watching the Red Sox, the Patriots as a Boston girl, but we're trying to broaden the coverage of who is featured and how they're featured. So that means that less than 15% of sports coverage goes to women.
Yeah,
But of that 15%, it pretty much goes to women who look like me. So that's white, able bodied women from the global north, normally who play soccer or basketball,
yeah.
increasingly so hockey. If you are an athlete who plays a lesser known sport, if you are black or brown, if you have a disability, good luck getting any coverage, let alone being portrayed in a way that resonates with you and not kind of with the pity brush, if you will. So we cover the athlete, not the sport. So we don't do sports reporting. We're not competing with ESPN, talking about who's going to beat who.
Yeah.
We're really focusing on the athlete wearing the jersey, um, her qualities, what makes her tick, and what gets her up in the morning.
How's that been? Has it been?
It's been so cool. It's
Yeah.
been so cool. So we're 4.5 years in. We've worked with over 200 different Olympians and Paralympians from 52 countries. And every day I get up and I kind of have to pinch myself. I'm like, how do I have the honor and the privilege of doing this? It's absolutely crazy. Never imagined this would be what I would be doing, but here we are.
So that begs the question: how did you get started? What was your game plan originally, and then how did you get started?
Yeah, sure. So I like to just own this because I think it's kind of funny, to be honest. I started Flame Bears when I was a graduate student. I was receiving a master's in policy from Harvard, and I thought this was going to be my summer internship.
Yeah.
I had actually been pitching a role that didn't exist that I thought should exist to the IOC, so that's the International Olympic Committee, around their gender equity work. They do a lot of work around gender, around racial diversity. And I said, hey, I have almost a decade of experience in the media world. Let me help tell the world all the awesome stuff you've already done. But people don't know about it because it's buried in a really ugly report on your website that no one's actually going to read.
Yeah.
Let's help translate all the awesome stuff you've done into mediums like video, podcast, social media that people actually engage with today.
Perfect.
And there was interest, but then COVID happened and the world was turned upside down and no one knew what was left and right. And I said, well, you know what? I'm just gonna, I'm not just gonna sit here and twiddle my thumbs. At this point, we didn't know if the Olympics or the Paralympics were even going to happen.
Yeah.
They ended up being postponed for a year, but I said, well, fine. I guess I'll just give this a shot on my own. I built a team within the Harvard ecosystem. I
Yeah.
talked to people who were smarter than me, brighter than me, had done this before. And I said, okay, no one else is doing this work. Let's hit the ground running. And 4.5 years later, we've expanded to different mediums. So I mentioned video, I mentioned live events,
Yeah.
and it's all with the goal of centering these stories because I think that stories are the best way to get people to connect and relate. So my secret goal is really to get people to watch and care about women's sports and to value women's sports. And the way I'm doing it is by sharing
Yeah.
stories that people can relate to.
It's pretty cool. Did you get to go to Paris?
I did. I was in Paris and I was actually at Tokyo, the Olympics that, there was no one at, which was absolutely surreal. But yes, I was in Paris for the Olympics and the Paralympics. So it's nice to finally be home. I was gone for about a month and a half between the two of them. And hey, what an incredible honor. Really not, Oppo is poor woe is me eating crepes every day, right? Like
Yeah, I was
in
gonna say
Paris. Exactly. But it's really wonderful to be home
it
again.
could have been worse.
It could have been a lot worse.
Well, the next ones are in LA, right? I think.
It, yeah, that's the next summer games. So that we have Milan Cortina for the winter games in between, and then LA in 28.
So you get to go to, let's see, Paris, Milan, and Los Angeles. Yeah, it sucks to be you, Jamie.
Exactly, exactly. I know. How hard is my life? Everyone feel bad for me. Absolutely not. No, it's great.
Yeah.
It is sometimes surreal when I think about it that I have the ability to expose myself and throw myself into these different environments. And I think what's really cool and I'm lucky is that unlike the athletes who I am featuring, I have to be on in a very different way. So the athletes are in their competition zone, they got to be locked in. A lot of what I'm doing when I'm traveling is networking. It's putting myself out there. It's approaching people on the street. It's approaching the athletes, their family. So I have to be kind of on in a very different way than the athletes who are laser focused on their one competition.
Yeah, it's interesting you said because I talked to them too about when they travel, it's diet, it's interviews and everything else that has nothing to do with their actual performance. And how do they get around that? And now you're kind of doing the same thing. Like they're focused on, hey man, I worked 4 years for the next 9.8 seconds or whatever. And then you're like, hey, let's talk about women's sports.
Exactly. 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 And then meanwhile, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go eat a crepe, eat a lot of Nutella. How about a glass of wine? So I don't have the strict some of the boundaries that athletes have. And that's definitely freeing. The ability to go to gymnastics during Paris and stumble upon Jordan Childs' parents outside the arena and say, hey, your daughter just won an Olympic medal. How's that going? How does that feel for you? That's something where the athletes are backstage. They're, unwinding after their competitions. So it's incredibly freeing. At the same time, you got to have the guts to just walk up to random people and jump into conversation, which in the beginning I was a little off about, but I got over that pretty quickly.
How did you get over it? Because I have an opportunity coming up and I need to similar and I need to get over that.
Yeah, it was one of those moments where I kind of honestly had to just jump into the deep end. It's like when you're going to take a cold shower, jump into a cold pool or a cold lake. And I am not a dip your toes in type of person.
Yeah.
I realized that that was probably going to be more painful for me. I also realized that I had a once in a lifetime opportunity being in Paris, being in Tokyo, and really wanted to take full advantage of it. And to be honest, I think regret is a major driver for me. So I didn't want to then 3 weeks, a month and a half after Paris, sitting there kicking myself, saying, Jamie, you just totally blew that opportunity and you didn't go for it. There is definitely an element of self-talk,
Yeah.
saying, kind of giving myself a pep talk before I just walk up to someone. That's kind of embarrassing, but it's true, and it helps me. And then I have to honestly view it from the other person's perspective. As long as you're being respectful of their privacy, thoughtful with your questions, and if they don't want to talk to you, back off. I feel like it's all fair. I think where journalists go afoul is when they're not being respectful of the people that they're approaching.
I always tell people I live in Los Angeles and there was, oh, have you met celebrities? Man, celebrities are just people. Sometimes they have bad days. Sometimes they have good days.
It, totally.
And athletes are the same way. I mean,
That's exactly right. That was, sorry, I think we have a little bit of a delay.
yeah.
I am actually on in but yes, so that's exactly right. And that was one of the things that I had to get over early on when talking to athletes like Sue Bird or Caster Semenya or Becky Sauerbrunn. They're just humans. And I think so often with celebrities, and athletes, we put them up on pedestals and we say they are superhuman Greek gods and Greek goddesses. And yes, there's an element that's true because of their physicality, how insanely talented they are. Same ups and downs. They have struggles, they have relationships, and they're people with their own insecurities.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, is your standard show is more of a long format, but when you're out on the road, when you're, how do you switch it up to a short format? Is it because that's what throws me off.
Yeah, totally. So when we go to a live event like the Olympics or the Paralympics, we definitely primarily focus on short form content that is for YouTube and for social media or for live podcasts that tend to be max 15 minutes. So significantly shorter because the athletes have less time if they're traveling. So, for example, if I were to get an athlete during the Olympics, I'm not going to likely be able to get them for an hour. I can get them for 10 minutes in between events while they're kind of winding down. And that's okay. I think that there's certain questions that you can ask in those moments that are different than the questions that you would ask when they're at home. For example, if an athlete is preparing for an upcoming race in the Olympics, talking about what techniques they use to ground themselves to not freak out before their competition, talking about their self talk, talking about their mental preparation. Those are all questions you could ask if they were at home, but they're not actually in that moment when
Yeah.
they're at home. They're in a very different preparation mindset. So I like to ask athletes that are timely and relevant to where they are in that moment. I also think that video is a huge component with athletes when they're traveling because fans and community members want to see where they are kind of behind the scenes and what's going on day to day.
Yeah. So part of why I started my show is a lot of people see the athletes and they go, oh, they're so lucky and this and that. And then there's people like you who are gone from their home for a month and a half eating. I mean, it sounds great. You're eating crepes and all that, but it's still, it's not home. You don't have the luxury of having your full wardrobe, your friends, your families, birthday parties, anniversaries that you're missing. How was it,
Yeah.
yeah, for you?
Yeah, pluses and minuses. And I think right now in my life, I'm 36 years old. I do not have kids. I am recently engaged. I think it is perfect for right now in my life. I foresee a time in our future when, my future husband and I are going to likely have children that it could be harder for me to go out and do this, to be honest. But right now, I'm in a period of throwing myself into this work wholeheartedly where those trade-offs are worth it for me. But have to be super intentional when I am home about seeing my loved ones, about seeing my friends, about being really focused on making up for lost time, but also just really investing in the people and the activities that I want. There's certain things that, like you said, kind of go out the window when I'm traveling. I have a pretty consistent workout regimen when I'm at home, between running and weightlifting and yoga and cycling that I can't do that when I'm on the road. So I have to kind of come up with alternative ways to get my exercise fix, if you will. Maybe it's doing yoga in my hotel room, putting on a pair of sneakers and going out for a run wherever I am, which is a cool way to see a new city.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's seeing if there's, a bike I can rent up and hit the roads. But it's different than having, being in your own home with your own stuff. You also mentioned dress code. That's something I'm used to, washing my clothes in the sink, hanging them up in my Airbnb, and just kind of going with the flow. Looking the same, every 3 days, but that's just part of
That's exactly right.
it.
You know, uh, I wonder, do you ever broach when you have time in the longer formats, not necessarily at the Olympics, but
Yeah,
because female athletes have to deal with the same kind of question marks that you have. Okay, if I decide to
yeah.
have children, how does that affect my livelihood as an Olympian or an athlete?
Totally. It's so interesting. I've had so many conversations with athletes who say, I have to do my family planning around the Olympics.
Yeah.
So they're like, okay, the Olympics just ended. It's time to get pregnant. And I've had so many women say that they miss, an X period amount of time. And then they're like, oh, shoot, I have to wait until the next cycle
Yeah.
because their financial, everything is tied to their ability to perform. If they miss the Olympics, they miss out on sponsorship deals. They're going to miss out on airtime. They're going to miss out on A, B, and C. So for female athletes, that's a very real concern that is on a lot of people's mind for sure.
Hey, I mean, I definitely brought that up, and I'm trying to think back real quick. I'm trying to think of it. Almost all the female athletes I've talked to at the time were either not married or no kids of their Olympic,
Yep.
So that's just something a man doesn't even think about. Just
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. And we're also seeing athletes like Allison Felix, who is, the most decorated track and field, US track and field Olympian of all time, be outspoken about this. Nike wanted to actually cut her pay significantly when she went through having kids. And she said, I'm out. That's not going to fly with me. So we see athletes who are having kids and saying, I shouldn't have to choose because guess what? Men don't have to choose. They can be a dad and still compete. And we're seeing athletes like Allison kind of push back on that narrative that, if I have a kid, therefore you should drop me as a sponsor or you should slash my pay. She's saying that that's not going to fly anymore.
That's awesome, though. I mean, and I think stories like that need to get out.
Totally, totally. And Allison, this past Olympics and Paralympics, she had actually created um, a zone that was specifically for mothers and their babies for athletes to be able to breastfeed. This is the first time in Olympic and Paralympic history that kids were actually able to be in the Olympic Village with moms who, for example, were still breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Historically, it's been one of those things where, sorry, you had a kid, your kid can stay at home, your kid could come with your husband. But if you're breastfeeding as a mom, as a new mom, you want to have your kid around.
Yeah, it's to a certain extent you need to, right? I mean, it's just
Exactly.
we live in a village wasn't geared towards children.
That's exactly right. So we're seeing changes, but it's coming a little slow, but hopefully one day at a time.
Well, let's get flame bearers bigger, and then we won't have this issue.
That's what we're working on. That's what we're working on. So our hope is that when people hear these stories, they see a bit of themselves in every athlete that we profile. That sure, you may not be a para athlete from India, or you may not be an Olympic skier, or you may not be Sue Bird, but you are going to see certain qualities of yourself in each of these athletes. And we profile athletes from different backgrounds in the attempt of trying to show a wide range of different personalities, perspectives, so as many different people can relate to them as possible. Because we think the traits that make these athletes the best in the world are traits that can make every human successful, regardless of if they're an athlete or not.
It totally. I mean, if women's coverage is 15%, Paralympic female athletes is it even a percent of a percent?
No, that's exactly right. And that's why we think it's so important that this is able-bodied athletes and athletes with disabilities. Tokyo was actually the first Paralympics that was even shown on primetime television in the United States. So we're seeing a massive increase. Paris had even more coverage in the US, which was wonderful. But if you do look at sponsorships from a Paralympic perspective, it's incredibly hard. I had the opportunity to work with two-time Paralympic medalist Deja Young Craddock, and she said that it was nearly impossible for her as a Paralympic medalist to get a sponsor. And this is someone who is one of the best athletes in the world, and she's trying to just compete, and it's nearly impossible. So, yeah, the more layers we add on top of it in terms of ability and disability, you
Yeah.
add race in there, if you add sexuality in there, if you add religion in there, best of luck to you. It's unfortunate, and that's kind of why we're super intentional about half of our athletes being para athletes. A lot of our athletes are from the global south. A lot of our athletes are from marginalized communities. So for every household name that we do elevate, we like to support 5 or 6 athletes that maybe kind of unsung heroes that we think deserve a little bit more love.
It's like I interviewed Bree Schaff, who was the on the I don't know if you know Bree, but she was on the first Olympic bobsled team, women's bobsled team for the U.S.
So cool.
And now she does commentating for the sport, but for all the sliding sports. But I mean, if you were to ask the average American, do we have a U.S. women's Olympic bobsled team? How many people would say, "A what?" And here she is
That's
dedicating
exactly right.
a huge part of her life to this, representing her country, and people don't even know about it. So hurry up, Jamie.
That's exactly right. Join us. So yeah, there's lots of ways that if anyone who's listening wants to help us out or be a part of the movement, I could get to that later, but there's lots of ways that we would love to work with you.
I was going to ask you because you're trying to get the athletes sponsors and support. And I'm sure your show needs
Yep,
sponsorship and support. And
you got it.
there's
Exactly.
a nice bucket of money.
So we come from very much a mindset that there's enough for an abundance mindset that I don't view us as competitors of the athletes for those sponsorship dollars. If anything, I view us as a completely different bucket and that there's enough to go around. What we do is that we've historically been funded from grants and fellowships. We are moving towards a sponsorship model where companies, individuals, teams can pay us to create branded sponsorships or branded content, if you will. For example, the U.S. women's national soccer team from 1999. This is the team with Mia Hamm and Brandy Chastain that won at the Rose Bowl. Just hired us for their 25th anniversary when they were honored at the New York Stock Exchange and the Today Show, and then they got to be honored at the USA Olympic send-off game. So we provided all of their video, social media, on the ground support. So if anyone is out there who is looking for content, branded content around women's sports and storytelling, we would love to work with you.
I'm curious to ask you,
Yeah.
and I don't know the specifics. So I'm literally, but like, let's say Adidas women's division says, "Hey, we'd love to be a part of your program. We want, but here's what we want. We need our name on this and that." And then you talk to a Nike sponsored athlete who says,
Yeah.
"Hey, I can't have Adidas on my stuff." Do you think about that
All the time. So we've
personally?
worked with a lot of no, that's exactly right. Those are the conversations that we have to have. There's athletes with different types of sponsorships. So there's athletes who are exclusively Nike, exclusively Adidas. There's athletes who've been sponsored for kind of specific events where they don't have to wear branded gear outside of that. So every time we work with a different athlete or a brand, we have to understand specifically what they're looking for and what are the bounds of that partnership. Are there any constraints? So, for example, we did a panel at an event. It was at a Super Bowl side event 2 years ago out in Phoenix, Arizona. And one of the athletes who was participating was sponsored by Nike, and the jerseys we had them wearing were sponsored by Under Armour. So we had to have hers be custom made to not include the Under Armour logo. To your point of trying to figure out, okay, she has this independent sponsorship. How do we make sure that she respects that? She still looks like she is a part of this cohesive unit for the event while also being in the bounds of her partnership.
Yeah. I guarantee most people don't think about that kind of stuff.
No, absolutely not. You're like, this is a cool event. I loved her. That's great. They don't even think about, oh, there was a swoosh on this person's jersey. With the recent, I mentioned the 1999 team. There's only specific soccer balls we could use in all of those videos because of the relationship that US Soccer has with with particular brands. So there were times when we were not allowed to use specific soccer balls because that was not the brand partner. So we just things that we have to be really intentional and mindful of.
Yeah,
Whereas most people would be like, grab any soccer ball, go whatever, just kick it around. Not kosher.
not that easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be, I know the UFC fighters have, the MMA fighters really similar issues. And and I think even like the beach volleyball players have issues with that, because they have some of their leagues have specific balls that are used, and then other leagues use a different brand of specific ball, so they can't use that ball while they're warming up and all this. But I mean,
Exactly.
those companies paid a lot of money
Exactly.
to get their name out, so I get it.
Totally. And I think that's one of the things that I completely understand and we have to be within the bounds of. And it's just kind of um another line in the sand that you just got to be mindful and intentional about.
Okay, can I share a story with you? I interviewed.
Please.
Uh, he's the director of professional sports for New Era ball caps. So
Cool.
baseball caps for all the baseball teams and football teams. He's the guy on the field at the Super Bowl handing out the "You're the new champion" caps. So yeah,
Wow.
I'm available. But but he has to travel to the deciding games of all the World Series and the playoffs to hand out the World Series hats. But he has to go to all the deciding games and have the two sets of hats. Anyways, he said that New Era has done a video analysis of every baseball park used and determined what percentage of time uh, the shot from home plate is shot is 23%. For the pitcher is 23% of film usage. The right field is used 0.3%. They know where to place their logos around
No
every
way.
individual stadium. So they say, hey, for Cincinnati ballpark, we want our logo here, 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 and here to maximize, but down to the actual percent of how much time it's used on TV.
That is incredible. That is absolutely incredible.
I'm
I
a,
one thing I would love to know, what do they do with the hats of the people who do not become the winner? I've always wondered that actually.
overseas,
Okay,
three hats overseas.
got it. That makes sense.
Yeah. So anybody that played the Chiefs for the last couple of years has world championship hats somewhere overseas.
Fair enough. The champions who never were. Not yet, at least.
Exactly. Yeah. And he has to put so he's down underneath in the stadium getting ready to press on the world championships of whatever team wins. And so if it goes like to the 10th inning or if it's cut close, man, it's all hands on deck getting the hats prepped.
Oh, interesting. I expected the hats to be made well before the game and to have two sets of hats, and you don't know
They
which
try
way you're
not
gonna
to.
go. But he's
Yeah.
actually pressed. Okay.
And then like he went
Wow.
to the All-Star game and when they changed up the hat process for the All-Star game because it's a different hat, but each guy wanted their own team on the hat. So he goes, "Yeah, I have to go to the All-Star game with like 5,000 caps and then there's,
Jeez.
another 5,000 that need to be sold or distributed and then there's a certain set." So he has to go to all the spring trainings and measure all the players' heads. So because they're all fitted hats. His job is measuring heads.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
And like you were saying with your sports, right? Like there's so much that goes on behind that people never think about. You know,
That's exactly right. And those are the things that we try to give voice to. When you watch the Olympics or the Paralympics, you see that 10-second clip of the athlete after the start gun goes off. But what you don't see are the hundreds, thousands of hours of them, alone in the gym, alone doing their reps, struggling with the times when they're set back. Those are the things that I think make them who they are when we do see them on TV. But that's what happens when the fans and the cameras go away. But at the end of the day, that's what makes them who they are.
and because I interviewed Lex Gillette's a 100% blind Paralympian, a long jumper. But his story about how, I mean, like it's hard enough just to become an Olympian. So talking to a Paralympian, like how do you get to Paris as a blind person? I mean, physically
It's
get to Paris. So
totally. It was super interesting when I was in Paris. I was looking at everything for the Paralympics through the lens of what I assume or can espouse to believe would be someone with a disability. Now, I do not have a physical disability, but when I was walking around,
Not married
when
yet.
I was on the
Coming.
yeah, when I was walking around on the subways, I was looking and there's escalators, there's no elevators. So if you're in a wheelchair, you can't use those subways because you're going to be stuck. There's so many situations that I take for granted as an able-bodied individual that someone with a physical disability like Lex is not going to be able to use or do. Oftentimes, and I can't speak for Lex, but with a lot of the athletes who I've worked with, if they have wheelchairs, they don't let them go under the airplane because they're literally their legs, and they frequently have seen their wheelchairs get left behind.
Yeah.
They've watched out the window of an airplane as a mechanical worker kind of tosses it in and a part of it breaks off. All these things that this is not just a normal bag, this is an extension of their mobility and how they get around. Then there's the actual element of like, kind of what I talked about, navigating the arena, navigating to the venue. A lot of athletes, if you are visually impaired, use canes or they have dogs to help guide them. I have the opportunity to work with Anastasia Pagonis, who I believe is a three-time world champion now in swimming. And she has a guide dog named Radar who she walks around with. And her whole brand is literally about debunking how people, quote unquote, see the visually impaired. So she has about 500,000 followers on social media. And she will talk about this is what it means to put on my makeup as a blind girl. This is what it looks like. This is not what it looks like. Here's how I go to the gym as someone with vision impairment. And literally show people that there's a lot of stereotypes around what we think someone who's visually impaired looks like, but this is what it means for her to actually be her.
And then compete at a world class championship level. Yeah. On top of all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. Exactly. It's one part of who she is, and the other part is, being one of the best athletes in the world.
Yeah. It just happened to be, one of the best in the world.
Literally.
So what's the long game for Flame Bears?
Yes. So we want to become the go-to storytelling site, the go-to media production company for the best women athletes in the world. There are a couple different companies out there which we are big fans of that do wonderful sports reporting where they cover the games that are happening right now. They talk about the matchups, but we're really the only ones who focus on the human interest side of things. And we're definitely the only ones who focus on para athletes and with a global scale. There's a couple companies out there that do a wonderful job of focusing specifically on US women athletes.
Yeah.
There's a new company that was just established the other day specifically for para athletes, but it's co-ed and it's US focused. So what we're trying to do is we're becoming the go-to media company that elevates the stories of women globally in an inclusive manner.
That's all.
We're trying. We would love for any and all to be a part of it. Can't do it without you.
That is so true. I mean, I'm curious. I mean, you're 36, so in my world, you're young. Um,
Hmm.
I think back 15 years ago, even a company like yours would never have happened without being part of CBS or ABC or one of the big companies or HBO even, or I mean,
Yeah.
somebody just couldn't start up their own media company and go worldwide and make it without
Yeah.
without backing ahead. So I mean,
And I think yeah, that's so true. To be honest, there was, I think the fact that I tried to actually begin within the IOC is kind of indicative of the fact that I realized that that would be a significantly easier route to go in the sense that right now I'm having to build our own audience.
yeah,
We had during the Olympics and the Paralympics, we reached 14 million unique people. That's crazy for an independent media organization. But I think that we have tools at our disposal that probably wouldn't have been available 15 years ago. The fact that podcasts are significantly listened to, social media, the ability to reach people anywhere they have a phone.
Yeah.
That's super cool. The fact that we can reach people in 52 different countries, what 15 years ago, there's a lot of those places where, internet connectivity wasn't as strong. So those are definitely all pluses.
Yeah.
There's also the ability to do things differently as a media organization. There's a lot of stories that I've told that I know would not have flown, would not have been given coverage if I worked within certain established organizations because they're controversial, because I'm taking a stand that, is a little different. It's going to promote some controversy. And what I have found being in the corporate world before this is that I don't want to have any more red tape. I don't want red tape to get in the way of journalism. I don't want it to impact whose stories are being told and whose are not being told. If we're going to be inclusive and we're going to try and elevate all voices, that means that we're going to even elevate the voices who, a media exec may say, yeah, let's stay clear of that. But for me, I'm kind of over that.
Oh yeah, because if you were part of the bigger media group, you wouldn't be interviewing Paralympians because it doesn't get
That's exactly right.
that they need to pay their advertisers.
That's exactly right. And I think that there's a level of freedom and responsibility there where I'm saying, yeah, okay, if I was driven solely by the bottom line, I would only be covering athletes, honestly, like Caitlin Clark. And I love Caitlin Clark. I am a massive Caitlin Clark fan. There's nothing I will do to get a negative word out of my mouth about her. That said, I think it's a yes and situation, not an either or situation. And when companies just portray one type of person, we're missing out on 95% of the pie. And that's great because there's a lot of girls who deeply look up to Caitlin Clark, myself included, if you count me as a little girl. That said, there's a lot of other role models out there who we need to uplift as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all I guess I can say is because, like, I interviewed Meryl Davis, who won the Olympics in ice dancing.
So
And
cool.
she got a lot of press, and then she did Dancing with the Stars and got the gold. But then you got Bree Schaff. You have Maria Koroleva, who was two-time Olympian in synchronized swimming. Synchronized swimming is not getting any coverage, and then it's a team sport, so you have one person and you don't see her that much because she's in the water. And yet she's committed
Right,
8, 10 years of her life to it.
right.
I
It's
that's why
super
I like the media.
interesting that you mentioned that. Sorry. Sorry, I was going to say it's super interesting that you mentioned that, Peter, because for our recent series on athletes in Paris, we had an athlete co-host who's a two-time Olympian, six-time national figure skating champion of France. Her name is May Bernice Mete. And she voiced to the Summer Olympians that Winter Olympians in general feel like the Summer Olympics get so much more coverage. So the sponsorship dollars are there, the viewership is there. So there's always something. And then the Paralympians feel like the Olympians get so much more. And then if you are in a lesser known sport, you feel like the athletes in more common, more popular sports get it. So there's always something where if you're looking at other people and you're going to say, oh, the grass is a little greener over there.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess because obviously Caitlin Clark's not going to become a synchronized swimmer, and just like Maria
Right.
is not going to become a basketball player just because there's more money. So you do. Yeah, I don't think people understand. You don't do the Olympics for money. I mean, it's a broke person sport. I mean, for the most part. I mean, they're not all the NBA players coming over and helping the U.S. win another gold medal.
Definitely. Absolutely. That is something that I have frequently heard from athletes that it is less about sports. It's more honestly a dream that many of them have had since they were children. The idea of representing your country at a stage that is the biggest stage in world sports. It's something about unifying the world. It's something that everyone can get behind at a time when, everyone is fighting and not getting along.
Yeah, yeah, and that's always been the Olympics. I mean, that's now I'm not gonna appreciate the Olympics as much when it's in LA because it's gonna mess up my traffic for a few weeks. But I
Sorry
remember
about that.
in
I'll be there,
'84 it
but
was bad, so coming back,
oh,
yeah, so it's already bad traffic. Now they're saying it's going to be a carless Olympics.
No way. A carless Olympics. I am
They
so curious to see that.
they want it to be all mass transit. I'm like, what?
Wow.
So they're building trains right now. They've been working on the train from LAX to all parts of LA to all the stadiums. It's under construction right now.
I can't wait to see it.
I can't wait to see it implemented. It's gonna be like the Tokyo games where they were finishing the stadiums before, like right up to the moment of the games.
Right. It's funny. I was talking to some Parisians right before Paris, and they were saying a month ahead of time that they thought there was no chance that it was all going to be ready, and it was ready, and it was somehow they pulled it off. Who knows how?
Yeah,
But they kind of had
well,
that same feeling.
yeah, it's gonna be the same way. Well, hey, so what's the best way for my listeners to follow the Flame Bears?
Yes, so you can follow our website, flamebearers.com. So flame as in the thing in the Olympic torch, bearers as in the people who bear the flame. You can also find us on all social channels. So Instagram, Facebook, uh, Twitter, because I refuse to call it X, TikTok, YouTube. If anything I said today resonates with anyone, we actually have a collaborate button on our website. Fill it out. You don't know how you want to work with me, but you could just say, part of what you're doing is resonating. If you don't want to do that, it takes 3 minutes. Shoot me an email, jamie@flamebearers.com, and I'll get right back to you.
And she's very, very efficient at that. So, well, thank you so much for spending the time. I really appreciate it. You're doing a great thing. So, whenever you get down, just know you're doing a great thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it, Peter. And I love your show.
Thanks. Well, enjoy your day and get more women on the air there.
We're doing it. We're doing our best. They're doing the hard work. We're just trying to give them the credit they deserve.
Exactly. Thanks, Jamie. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.